Good morning to all. I'm sorry I don't have all the other fancy, translations for good morning, as Marcia did. So you all will forgive me. So, His Excellency Ambassador Aren Bistabrook, head of the delegation of the European Union of Trinidad and Tobago to Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Otavio Kelotti, acting chargé d'affaires, Embassy of Brazil, Ms. Sharifa Ali Abdullah, Assistant Resident Rep, UNDP, Francesco Gaetani, did I say it right? Okay. Regional Coordinator, Division of Science, UN Environment. And you would notice I say UN Environment. It's only this morning I learned it's no longer UN Environmental Program, but now UN Environment. Ms. Raquel Brada dos Santos, Director of the Department of Sustainable Development, Production and Consumption, Ministry of Environment, Brazil. Deputy Chair, Ms. Judy Daniel, and quite a support to the Chair. And a fellow member of the board, Hayden Romano, who also serves as the EMA's Managing Director. And also, as I look around, I see senior staff of the EMA, management and staff, so I acknowledge you as well. In absentia, Professor John Agard, a former chair, actually, of the EMA, who I understand is joining you later, now holding the post of Director, Office of Research, Development and Knowledge Transfer in UE. Keisha Garcia, co-chair of the Geo6 Regional Assessment for Latin America and the Caribbean. Delegates from the Caribbean, Latin America and Caribbean region. Members of the media. Well, I think we do have maybe one. We all know why, right? They're all gearing up for the very important event later today. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, good morning. So I start by telling you, first of all, that the Minister of Planning and Development, the Honorable Camille Robinson-Regis, could not be with us this morning. She sends her apologies, and we would know that as a senior member of cabinet, they're making the very final preparations for budget. I believe the presentation is at 2 p.m. today. Unfortunately, I have no inside info, so I can't say anything about budget later today. But the minister did say, however, expressed her pleasure to have the United Nations Environment choose this country, Trinidad and Tobago, for Caribbean Environment Week, and expresses the hope that all participants and stakeholders have fruitful discussions on the way forward for environmental sustainability in the Caribbean region. And I want to add that I am sure you would. So on behalf of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, we again sincerely thank the United Nations Environment for selecting Trinidad and Tobago. And I know I'm looking at the United Nations Environment as I say that. Let me talk about a little bit about the EMA and its ties to the United Nations Development Program. Many people will know perhaps that the EMA became operational in January of 1996. But before that, for a period of 6 months, before the EMA became an entity on its own, the EMA was actually a program of the United Nations Development. Well, it was a project of the United Nations Development Program. So the ties that the EMA have with the UN are strong. There's a foundational, it's a foundation of over 20 years engagement with a host of projects and development programs. And it's only fitting that at this point we recognize one of Trinidad and Tobago's stalwarts, who also made these ties stronger and whose work we do not wish to go unnoticed, and that would be the late Angela Cropper. She served as a Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environmental Program, as it was then called. Of course, now you have changed it. She was best known for her work as a sustainable development practitioner. And Keisha, I know, who worked closely with her, said that's what she likes. She would like to be remembered for her work as a sustainable development practitioner. And the EMA was also fortunate that Angela Cropper would have served as a previous board member as well. Working in partnership with member states, United Nations Environment continues to lead and drive the world's agenda as it relates to the environment and sustainable development. The organization has been the pioneer for progressive change in Latin America and the Caribbean by strengthening institutions for the wise management of the environment and its resources. And I want to just highlight two projects, recent programs that were implemented in Trinidad and Tobago by UNEP. And these include Pro-EcoServe, which aim to utilize ecosystem assessment and a range of assessment tools, including economic valuation, to better integrate economic services into poverty reduction strategies and sustainable development planning. The second was facilitating financing for sustainable forest management in small island developing states and low forest cover countries, which aimed at producing financing mechanisms for sustainable forest management. May I interject and say I did not apologize for my lengthy speech before, but I will do so now. These projects have continued to assist our nation in building our capacity to better understand our environment and sustainable development. The Latin America and Caribbean region, as I know you there represent, will continue to experience environmental threats that will negatively affect us across all sectors of society. Climate change and its associated impacts on smaller island developing states can prove to be greater as compared with other regions of the world, whether it's intense rainfall, unprecedented and unpredictable hurricane intensity and frequency, or excessive heat episodes and droughts. We can no longer idly stand by and hope that our small island states are spared being dealt the next hand of devastation as a consequence of climate change. This Atlantic hurricane season has been nothing short of devastating. Our Caribbean region has suffered tremendously with the passage of both Hurricane Irma and Maria. The islands of the northeastern Caribbean in particular, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, Tortola, St. Martin, Turks and Caicos, St. Croix, US and British Virgin Islands, Cuba, Puerto Rico have all suffered tremendous destruction and loss of life as a result of these hurricanes. These events were tragic and we commiserate with our regional neighbors. And I'll just go off script here just to say that yesterday it was touted that just the recovery for Dominica alone is probably going to be like about 7 of Trinidad and Tobago's national budget. So what Trinidad and Tobago will spend in 7 years, that is what it would take Dominica to get back on the road to recovery. So it's very, 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 very hard road ahead, not just for Dominica, but for all of these other Caribbean neighbors. Mr. Romano, do we have anyone from Dominica here? No? No. Okay. What should also not be undermined are the climate-related impacts that are often not as visible as the hurricanes and the droughts and so on, and that accumulate over the long term. These include, for example, the impacts of climate change on our rich biodiversity here in the Caribbean, both on land and in the ocean. The impacts on our scarce and precious resources, water resources, impacts on human health, impacts on important sectors such as tourism and agriculture, and the impacts on local livelihoods and cultures, to name a few. The already fragile economies of our region and the well-being of our peoples are at serious risk from these effects, and cost of recovery, according to research, is very high. And I just cited one of the examples. I know they would want me not to go off script too much, but I just want to make the point, we have some very pretty sea turtles here. And when we talked about, the intangible aspects of climate change, just want to make the point that these are migratory species. And with the changing of the weather and the temperatures and so on, it's really messing up the cycles, the migratory cycles for our sea turtles, for our whales and other marine mammals and so on. So it's right before us where we are already feeling all those impacts. So back to script. We therefore need to be more proactive in our approach to dealing with environmental issues. We need to adapt, but we need to mitigate against the effects as well that are imposed upon us by climate change. Disaster management is now a necessity, not just with natural disasters such as hurricanes, but also with severe earthquakes that have affected our region, as Mexico experienced recently. Better mainstreaming of environmental considerations across all aspects of development planning is considered a crucial step. And we have been singing this mantra ever since I first started in the environment. And I'll just tell you, that's probably 30 years ago. The government of Trinidad and Tobago is committed to doing its part to help the world achieve Goal 13 of the Sustainable Development Goals, climate action. In ratifying COP21, TNT has put the wheels in motion to make tangible progress in reducing our nation's carbon emissions. The transportation, industrial, and power generation sectors have been earmarked for transformative work to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, especially given that these sectors, when combined, account for less than 1% of TNT's global total, but the highest emissions among small island developing states. Through this workshop that has been scheduled for Environmental Information Week, it is hoped that our countries will be better prepared to identify data gaps, increase collaboration, share data, and identify climate change impacts and plan mitigation and adaptation efforts more effectively. And I think that's really, it took me quite a long time to get to this point, which is really the meat of why you all are here, gathering at the Hyatt for the next, today and the next 2 days. Among the topics being discussed this week are the global environmental issues in the Global Environmental Outlook report. This report gives a holistic and realistic impression on the state of environment as a common global nation. Thus far, we have had 5 such reports published by the UN Environment, and we look forward to discussions on the preparation of the 6th. Told you all it was long. We all need to agree on the environmental indicators for our region. Some may be very clear to us, such as increased sea level rise, but there are many other indicators that need to be explored analyzed and tested. We should always work towards pooling our resources to make the most prudent decisions for Latin America and the Caribbean. As countries of the region continue in their efforts to transition onto more sustainable pathways for development, regional collaboration and cooperation will undoubtedly serve in our best interests. The Ministry of Planning and Development, and incidentally that's the EMA's parent ministry, in collaboration with the UNDP, held a final stakeholder consultation in a series of consultations in 2015 to refine the activities and timelines necessary to implement a carbon reduction strategy in the 3 sectors. And I had said it before, which were the sectors. The strategy aims to achieve the carbon reduction target of 15% by 2040, which will amount to 169.2 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions. This commitment by the ministry, and by extension the government, is one that we intend to pursue and make a reality. Achieving the sustainable development goals and establishing the indicators for climatic events are, of course, priority, not just for our region, but for the wider global community. This can only be realized if we put in place proper reporting formats and communication channels for each nation to be on the same page as it relates to the environment. The EMA, as part of its mandate, produces a State of the Environment report every single year that reflects the environmental conditions in TNT. This report will greatly benefit from the workshop and indicators going forward. So from the board to the EMA management, we expect now that we would have an A or ASOE that would be in sync with this. So the global outlook of the environment report is commendable, and I can only hope that our region can produce a document that is as comprehensive and well put together as that report. I was going to talk about the scarlet ibis and all the work we are doing, but I'll skip that because suffice to say, just to say that the scarlet ibis is a bird under siege, one of our national birds, and the EMA has stepped forward to further protect that bird by making it environmentally sensitive species. And what that means is fines will now be 100-fold from what it was under the Conservation of Wildlife Act. So I end by saying that the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the EMA would like to expressively thank once again the UN Environment for hosting this week in Port of Spain, Trinidad. We also thank the Ministry of Planning and Development, the Federative Republic of Brazil, the Ministry of Environment Brazil, the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, and the Ministry of Tourism in Trinidad and Tobago. We are committed to sustainable development that will support the enhancement of human well-being and preserve the environmental integrity of the region. And I thank you for your indulgence and for listening so attentively. Best wishes for your workshop.